Hello and welcome to Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. My name is Jim. What? Nope.
We're keeping that because your name isn't Jim. Your name is
My
Ben.
name is Ben and with me is...
Jim. I'm Jim. This is going to be a great podcast.
Look,
really...
hey, as far as Jackie Chan films goes, bloopers are a tradition.
It's true. They're usually at the end, though,
Yeah.
of a quality product.
So, this week we watched Shanghai Noon.
That we did.
Wow, what a start.
I know. Look, why don't we continue that run and you can lead us off with a synopsis and some facts about the film before we dive in, because I'm super excited. I have a lot to say. I love this movie and I'm glad that we watched it this week. But synopsize us, if that's a thing that people say.
Say away. In Shanghai Noon, an unlikely, quietly poetic tale unfolds as Chong Wang, or John Wayne, an Imperial Guard from the Forbidden City, ventures to the barren plains of the American West. His mission to rescue a kidnapped princess, but along the way he unexpectedly is joined by a roguish, down-on-his-luck outlaw, Roy O'Bannon. Against the sunburned landscapes and gritty sepia tones, these two misfits find camaraderie in their struggle to overcome language barriers, cultural divides, and personal failures. This oddball partnership blossoms into something deeper, a testament to friendship, honor, and resilience in a land that shows them no mercy. It is an artful dance of East meets West, with laughter and poignancy braided together, proving that even in the wildest of frontiers, there's room for unexpected friendship. Can you guess the keywords I used?
I'm very curious as to what your ChatGPT prompt was for that one.
Art house review.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense because that's not really the movie we watched. But
it is if you read between the lines, okay?
I guess. Maybe. In an alternate universe.
Man travels from China, meets cowboy, action ensues.
All right. Look, give us some facts about it so we can talk about it properly.
Released the year 2000. It's a big year. Directed by Tom Day. Failure to launch, Marmaduke wedding season. Fun fact about Tom Day, when you look up his Wikipedia, his you may know him by some films, is his exact films that he has made. Written by Alfred Gough, Miles Miller, are their writing partners. Everything they've written, they've pretty much written together. Starring Jackie Chan, Owen Wilson, and Lucy Liu. Budget of $55 million and a box office of $99.3 million. I had a question during the week from somebody who listens to our podcast. I'm always talking American domestic when I talk about box office, because that is pretty much how movies are judged anyway, especially back then. Modern markets are a little bit different. China and that comes into play now, but yes, 99.3 million.
Yeah.
American domestic.
And you kind of have to specify that sort of thing for this type of movie, because if you look at that, by today's numbers, if you're like, hey, it's a worldwide gross, it's like, that's not that successful, but look, this movie did do well when it came out.
Yeah.
People loved it. I loved it. What was your relationship, if you like, to Shanghai Noon at the time?
This is a super fun movie. I liked it then. I like it now. Basically, Jackie Chan is one of those people who is the ultimate entertainer. And whatever movie he's in, I'm pretty much going to enjoy, whether he's treating it seriously or comedically. And I actually think his greatest talent, shown off in this again, is comedically. I will watch this movie again. I'd forgotten about it. And strangely enough, as things get buried after time sometimes and you forget about movies, this movie's just fun. This movie's a great background movie once you've seen it, just to kind of check in on the stunts when you know they're coming up and stuff. I'm really happy this movie was suggested by one of our listeners and watchers. And thank you so much for getting us to watch it.
All right, great podcast. Let's game over and we'll go home.
No, I got things to speak about.
Yeah. No, look, I love this movie as well. And I should say that it's funny because if you look at that sort of like Jackie Chan's introduction, if you like, to the worldwide marketplace through American cinema, you've kind of got this trajectory in the 1990s. Like, he'd been active in the late 70s and prolific in the 80s in Hong Kong cinema. But in terms of being introduced to Western audiences, we kind of had like a 3-step path, I guess. And this is step number 3, which is sort of like, we started with this sort of Chinese production of Rumble in the Bronx, which was, I want to say 95. Again, this is me going off the top of my head without facts, but I want to say Rumble in the Bronx was 1995. And that was sort of like, but it was still kind of that like a Chinese Hong Kong sensibility where people just spoke whatever their native language was and
Yeah.
they decided to dub it later. Do you know what I mean? Like, and so it would work for whatever marketplace, but it was still sort of that vibe, if you like, even though it was sort of set, it was set in New York and shot in like Vancouver or something. But we had that, and then of course the big one was Rush Hour in '98. With Chris Tucker, which really launched in a really big way into that sort of Western market, and people really seeing his stunt work and the type of stunts that he does for kind of the first time for a lot of people. And then we sort of solidified that with this movie, Shanghai Noon, which is a very similar formula to Rush Hour. And it's kind of weird because it's like you don't get to Shanghai Noon without first having Rush Hour, but at the same time, I kind of prefer Shanghai Noon personally. I don't know if it's the Wild West vibes or if I just feel like maybe it's the banter between Wilson and Chan, Owen Wilson and Jackie Chan maybe is just more sort of my scene. But whatever it is, I really enjoy this film, and I particularly like the sequel, which a lot of people don't like, but I do, which is Shanghai Nights. But that's for another day.
So with this movie, you're right. Like, it's an introduction, right? It's that stage three. But what I really do appreciate, and it's something he was doing all the way back in Hong Kong, is he actually created, or imported is probably a better word, a new industry to Hollywood, a new way to do stunts, a new way to do action. This kind of kung fu operatic movement dance comedy that uses your environment is maybe my favorite type of action in cinema. Even when it's used in things like later on in a serious way, like Ong Bak and things like that, that whole using your environment as part of the scene, as the prop, as the action, I find amazing. Like there's a classic scene in this where he uses a rope and a horseshoe, and it is brutal but played for funny. He does ladder gag in this like he does in many movies. Like that whole thing of like hard hitting, goofy action. It's his brand,
Yeah.
and
It's sort of,
this.
he's been described as like, this kind of kung fu Buster Keaton figure,
Yeah,
which I
that's a
think is,
great description.
yeah, it's really apt because it's this really skillful kind of, kung fu martial arts, but he has a circus background as well. And then that's incorporated in there. And then it's slapstick comedy. And I love that you brought up the horseshoe fight, because the only thing I have to say about the horseshoe fight is you got to respect the horseshoe. Okay. Because like, the horseshoe is this sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole because I knew that that was obviously a cool sequence, and then we watched it in Shanghai Noon again, obviously this week, and I was sort of like, oh man, that sequence. Let's find out more about that sequence, and it turns out that sequence is based on a fighting style called the rope dart, which is apparently an incredibly difficult fighting style, and it sort of borders on the completely impractical. Where it's sort of like you have to be highly skilled to do it, and it also might be a little bit impractical in most situations, but at the same time looks awesome and is also, you got to be truly skilled to do it. And
It's considered a
obvious
show martial art in a lot of categories. Like it's for entertainment, like in showing off skill, not necessarily for combat.
Yeah, absolutely. So that sort of got me looking at that, and then seeing what Jackie Chan does with his spin on it. No pun intended there, because there's a lot of spinning in that sequence. But like, is sort of like it's just awesome to actually see that happening, and you could also see that apparently, and this doesn't surprise me at all. It was a very difficult sequence for Chan to do, particularly on the American film schedule, and the schedule is something that I want to talk about a little bit, because this is also him getting used to the American film schedule, where he sort of was properly in the USA production pipeline in Rush Hour, and now again here. And he has openly talked about how much he struggled with not having the same time that he had in his Hong Kong productions to actually, create these action sequences, because he tells stories, and it's sort of amazing to me, but he tells stories of like Hong Kong in the 80s where they would shoot an action sequence until it was done. like,
Yeah.
which meant that they would shoot it for as long as they needed to shoot it until it was finished, because at that time film was cheap, extras were cheap, locations were cheap, it was cheap to film there. There wasn't really a time pressure, and then once they got it, they would move on to the next thing. And then you got into the tightly controlled, produced American system, and it was like, okay, you have X number of days to shoot this fight sequence. And he was like, what do you mean? Like, what if we don't get it in that time? What am I going to do?
The other thing that comes into play there is the American system is heavily unionized. Like, there are rules about how long people can be on set. There are rules about how long crews can be made to work. There are rules about overtime. There are rules about all these things, which didn't exist, and probably in a large part don't exist a lot still in the Hong Kong studio system. It was, you're right, we'd just get somebody else in to film it if someone has to leave. Like, we're not stopping until we get it. The American system doesn't work like that. You can't just get somebody else in unless they're union. You can't go past the rules unless you're willing to pay millions of dollars extra to make your movie. And yeah, you've got this guy who's like, well, normally I would backflip off this 400 times until I get it right. What do you mean I've got only 20 times? Like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah. And but I still think that kind of means that it's almost more impressive what you do get, because it was done under such constraints, and actually that's something where, if we get to the sequel to this movie, Shanghai Nights, it was actually where he'd now been in that more American system enough that he was really doing, deep production planning to actually make it work, and that was actually, not to talk too much about that movie, but I actually recall, the stories from that movie being like, the dialogue sequences they got in like half a day, and usually they would
Yeah.
do 3 days, because they just chunked that time and gave it all to the action. And I think he was much happier with the output there. But look, I still think Shanghai Noon is good. Interesting from an action perspective. I actually think the strongest stuff's all at the start. That train sequence is great,
Yeah.
like when they're sort of looking at that train sequence, and then even the horseshoe fight, which is quite short ultimately. I mean, very impressive, but very short. Like, that's sort of at the halfway point, and then before that, we had the big barroom brawl, and there's not too many big action sequences towards the end. There's obviously the finale and sort of the bell tower thing, but even that, it's not as big as some of the previous sort of sequences. So yeah, it's that weird kind of feeling where the most impressive stuff is kind of front loaded in the film, like, which I don't know, like, I love the movie, absolutely. What do you think about it structurally? Like, are you still with it?
Um, for me, again, enjoy it. There's some pacing problems in this movie. There's times where you're just waiting to get to the next piece of action, and you're like, man, I really wish this traveling sequence or this bit of Wild West lore would hurry up, because it's not necessary to what's enjoyable about this film or the story of the film. And you're kind of like, and I think also, strangely enough, there's too many people who know Kung Fu in this movie. Like, at the end, like, I think the strength of Jackie Chan, especially in a lot of Western movies, is he is the alien element. He is the element that is different. And as soon as you put him together in a scene with other people who are doing what he's doing, it's less enjoyable. Because when he's in a scene where it's just him, he's working around them, he's doing magic to them, and they don't know, or they're bamboozled, or they're combating it in a Western way. Whereas in the church scene where he's kind of Chinese versus Chinese, they're doing the same thing against each other, even though he's doing some of his trickiness. So yeah, look, they're probably the pacing, and that is my two criticisms of this film. And again, criticism is probably a bit of a strong word for how I feel about them. They're just like, I didn't need them. I didn't
Yeah.
need it. I'd rather him fight cowboys, and I'd rather him get to that faster.
It is, yeah. I'm sort of with you. Like, the middle of the film does drag a bit, and it's
Hmm.
also like, it's also got that weird thing of, there's this quest, if you like. We got to get to the princess. The princess is in trouble. We must get to the princess. And then, because it's also, though, a buddy comedy, we spend an awful lot of time not getting to the princess, and,
Yeah.
playing games in bathtubs and doing barroom brawls, and, learning how to be a cowboy, which also kind of undercuts and then I sound ridiculous to myself even as I say it. It's an action comedy. Who cares, Jim? Right? Like, but at the same time, I kind of do care. Like, that I'm sort of like, hey, we have this really important thing. The princess is in trouble, guys. We got to go get the princess, and yet we're spending all this time just kind of hanging out. And I want to hang out with these two. It's a lot of fun,
Yeah.
but also it is that weird kind of tension of plot versus what's actually enjoyable about the movie.
And I think the writers probably justified it as, hey, we need this because why else have a buddy comedy? And two, we need a corruption of our character so that he makes a choice at the end of the movie that he wouldn't make normally. And that corruption is spending time with Roy O'Bannon. Because without spending time, he doesn't make the choice to let the princess stay, which changes our finale of the film. So there is reason for it, but maybe there's just a bit too much of it.
Yeah, I gotta say, I'm a huge Owen Wilson fan, and this movie is the movie. Look, it was a combination. It was Armageddon and then this. And that kind of was like, okay, Owen Wilson for life for me. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it was a 1-2 punch. I love his performance. I love his delivery. I love his interactions with Chan. I love everything about Owen Wilson in this movie. And he could make one of these every 2 years, and I would just be there for it. How are you on the Wilson?
I actually didn't realize that a line I quote in my everyday life comes from this movie, and it is an Owen Wilson line where he suddenly thinks he's immortal. And he's
Yeah.
like, it's a miracle, I'm immortal. I've used that line, when those moments where you're walking along and something happens and you're like, oh, I stepped that way and that's catastrophe. I rolled my ankle or something. Every time I step out of that, I'm like, I'm immortal. I can't be killed. I'm unkillable. And I just start walking through my life. I've said that to myself so many times and I didn't realize it came from this movie. What could have been a joke and a very annoying character is not at all. Played by somebody different, this character is not endearing and is not likable. But with Wilson's kind of, and it sounds strange in a movie like this, soft touch with the material, it works very, very well.
Yeah, he's just a lovable goof, like, and he's just so incompetent that it's magical to watch. Like, I love just seeing how he just fails at every single situation, but in the best way. Do you know what I mean? Like, and he's such a I don't know, a 21st century soft male character in this Wild West world, and that juxtaposition is something magical. Do you know what I mean? Where he's just too friendly and nice and peaceful to actually live in
He
this
shouldn't
world.
be an outlaw.
He shouldn't be an outlaw. He can't fire his guns. He doesn't like violence. He really just wants to, talk to the
I
pretty
don't
girls.
I don't often laugh out loud when I'm watching a movie by myself. It's not a reaction I have. I laugh based on other people's reactions to things in films. I find things funny and I enjoy them, but I don't laugh out loud. The standoff with the sheriff in the main street where he starts talking himself into dying is one of the funniest things I've seen. He's like, you've got this. Oh, you don't got this. You're gonna die. Like, and it's all internal monologue, and he's keeping that kind of that mean pout the whole time. I had tears in my eyes during that scene, and as I said, normally I don't get caught by that stuff when I'm by myself. I'm a group laugher, but that piece of writing and that kind of real subtle kind of internal dialogue as he's watching this scene, like, because you've seen that scene a million times in movies, but you've never heard the internal dialogue of the person who can't do it.
I also love in the finale of the film. Okay, so there's this character, and it's the evil sheriff, if you like, Nathan Van Cleef, right? By the way, the performance of that character is fantastic. In a way that's sort of like, I kind of want like a serious movie with that character because he was amazing. So, but it's a culmination of everything that Wilson has done throughout the entire film that literally often leaves me rolling on the floor when Nathan Van Cleef literally says in the final standoff, how do you survive out here? Like, it's just like, it's what everyone in the audience is thinking for the entirety of the film. It's like, how do you survive out here? Like,
and he's not mean. He's like academically asking it. He's like, I don't get this.
He's genuinely like, this makes no sense. You should be dead. And it's just fantastic. And it's because of all the work that Wilson's done prior to that that allows that line to land in such a magical way in the finale of the film. So I'm totally there for it. I will say, did you notice, and I'm sure you did, I had forgotten Walton Goggins is in this movie.
Yeah. Before Walton Goggins was kind of like Walton Goggins,
Yeah.
like he'd already started to build that repertoire up of I know that guy in films, but nobody had
Yes.
gone, hey, it's Walton Goggins in that film.
Yes.
And he plays kind of a classic, you would expect him, the classic idiot who thinks he's smarter than he is outlaw.
Yep.
And he's very, in the short time he's in it, he's pitch perfect. So
Yes. This was definitely, it was, you're right. This is that period of, I know that guy, but I don't know his
yeah,
name. And now we know that that's Walton Goggins,
yeah.
So, but that's always cool to see stuff like that, where you see like, where someone, was still working, but not quite known yet. And we look back and we go, hey, I know that guy, I love those things. So in a way, this was kind of that for Lucy Liu as well, like, because it's a pretty early role for her. And
Yeah,
sort of,
she'd done a bunch of stuff, but she hadn't hit. She wasn't a name yet.
yeah, and it's sort of like, I mean, look, there's not much to the princess role. Like, she's great in what she has to work with, but there's not too much to play there. There's sort of, she's captured, she's there, she's waiting to get saved, and she does have a bit of an arc. They did a pretty good job considering that, like it's a hard character to do anything with when you look at what the plot gives it. But at the same time, she comes to understand that, being outside of her norms has sort of given her some understanding of what her people are going through there. So, there's a little bit of depth there, which was nice. But again, there's not much to the character. There's not much you can do with it. She does a good job with what you could do.
I didn't remember it, but I was actually surprised that she had a bit of her own action towards the end. Like she fought, which in this sort of movie where a person is the MacGuffin, if you will, that's not normally the case. So it was kind of nice. And you're right, like she makes this choice of I can go home and be a flower to be watched and observed and to be looked after, or I can actually stay somewhere and be useful. Yeah, right. It's not a lot in this movie, but it is kind of nice.
It's interesting. So that's sort of the love interest on one side, and then you
Yeah.
also have the fact that Chon Wen gets married in this movie towards the start, and his Native American Indian wife is
Most
then,
competent person in this movie.
yeah, and look, that was actually something that it happens 3 times in the movie where they get into a jam where they're about to die, and his unnamed Native American wife, who is apparently credited as, let me get this right, Falling Leaves in the film. So sorry, that's the character name, not the
Yeah,
not the
yeah.
actress name. So Falling Leaves comes and saves them, not once, not twice, but 3 times from various scrapes in the movie. And I must say, like, as a device, that does get a bit okay. We've seen it now. It's happening again.
If it could have happened just that third time, like you go, oh, like this person who's been sitting there quietly and suffering their tomfoolery is actually just amazingly competent and could have been helping them the whole time. I think that you're right. There's more impact to it.
It's just odd too, because it's like, where is she when they're doing all of their other stuff? She's just off screen somewhere.
Just like camping outside somewhere in town.
It's like she's got to be close enough to know that they're in trouble, but also far enough away that we can't see her. I'm like, well, who is this character? What is happening right now? What kind of
Strangely enough,
marriage is this, Ben? What kind of marriage is this?
I'm not sure you've played the games before, but she reminds me of Metal Gear Solid, the character from those movies, just like always in the background, no one's seeing her, and just going into action when she needs to. It's strangely enough, I'm pretty sure that was that actress's only movie. She was discovered in an article for a magazine, and then became a model for a few years, and then did this movie, and then I'm pretty sure this is only either her only mainstream movie or her only movie.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I cannot recall seeing her in anything else, but But yeah, look, it's a weird character. It's a weird character. It is funny, you know. There's some laughs there because of the situation where he accidentally gets married, and like you know that is humorous. But yeah, it's this character that is when you start to think about where she is when she's not helping them, it does get pretty funny pretty quick. So other things with that particular storyline, one thing that I recall Chan saying about this movie is that he found the fight where he's
Yep,
rescuing the boy in the
in the
river. He
forest.
found, yeah, in the forest in the river. He said he found that fight really challenging. And it's because of what you were saying before. It was like Jackie Chan's good at
Nothing there.
environmental comedy. And he's like, there's nothing here. He's like, there's some trees, there's some water. There's nothing here. What am I
And
going
he
to
uses
use?
both of those things.
I know, and he used look literally like if you have only just some trees and the water, you're gonna he uses them. He finds a way to make it work, and in a way, it's sort of like, how did you even do that? That's kind of a magic trick because there is nothing there. I can see how he just would have freaked out when he got to set. It was like you have to do an action sequence, come up with your usual Jackie Chan magic, but oh, sorry, we don't have any
One
props
of
or
my
any.
one of my favorite bloopers actually comes from that scene, and it's in the credits of this film. The axes.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
he throws the axes and catches them, and then he throws them back and they catch them. But obviously, when they film it, there's no one catching the axes he's throwing. He throws one and smashes a piece of equipment behind the camera, or the camera itself. I don't know which. And he's just like, "Oh, that's a lot of money. That's
yeah.
so much money." And he swears and stuff. It's very funny. Also, like, I think people forget too, Jackie Chan, although a good English speaker, has trouble with English dialogue because it doesn't make sense to his brain. He didn't grow up that way, right? And he was a fair bit older when he learned English properly. And you can see that in the bloopers of this film too, where he just kind of, a lot of scenes verbatim just repeats lines that are said to him. Like he's mimicking lines in some scenes rather than actually saying them, which is perfectly fine for 99.9% of the characters he plays. But it actually just gives that bit more kind of impressiveness to what he does, I suppose, comedically when he's not speaking to keep the audience engaged. Otherwise, it would be a bit weird. You'd eventually notice.
Yeah, it is tough, particularly I think those late 90s roles, you know, where
Mm.
he hadn't done that many full movies in English at that stage, you know. So and certainly this one's got more dialogue than Rush Hour had, you know, and they sort of increase it as he sort of does more of these sorts of movies. But yeah, it's definitely, you know, something that he got better at, you know, and he's good at it
Yeah.
here. Like he's not bad. Like it's
Yeah,
just
he's
like,
good.
you know, but the other thing that I want to highlight from an action perspective, I love the saloon fight. The saloon fight to me is pure chaos. And again, it's in that first sort of third of the movie, you know, where we've got the big train fight, which is awesome. And then we have the saloon fight as well. But I just love if you go from that sort of the forest fight where he was, you know, I mean, not that you'd ever know looking at the movie, but he said he was struggling because of the lack of
Yeah.
environment. Then you move to the saloon where it's like, oh, you got a playground now. Like, you know what I mean? You can use everything here, the bar, the stools, the, you know,
Yeah.
everything. So, and I love it. And he does use it and it's pure chaos. And because it's comedy as well, it just works really, really well. I love that sequence.
And as you're right, like kung fu is choreography in films. It's a dance, and as we said before, he did clowning and he did Chinese opera, and a lot of that comes through in the fluidity of his movements and how he uses environments and stuff like that. But the three best action scenes in this movie are all trope action scenes. There's the train, there's the bar, and there's the church, and all those are tropes of Western films as far as like scenes or finales or those sort of things. Like they do very well with playing with those things, and Jackie Chan does very well putting his flavor into it. And look, man, like I don't remember being a massive fan of Shanghai Nights, but this makes me want to watch it. So like
Yeah.
it's a really good first movie.
Look, look, we're not here to talk about Shanghai Nights, but man, I love Shanghai Nights. You know, like I think it's in particular the action in Shanghai Nights, I think really steps it up a notch from what you get in Shanghai Noon, you know, in large part due to the fact that they really worked out how to do the schedule. And I think that the rhythms of Chan and Wilson are awesome comedically in Shanghai Nights, and I actually like the story a little bit better as well. Even though I like the aesthetic of Shanghai Noon of the Old
Yeah.
West, I think the story is a bit tighter in Shanghai Nights. It's also like Shanghai Nights is like it's Jackie Chan fighting Donnie Yen, which is pretty cool. So even though but anyway, look, we're not here to talk about
Yeah.
Shanghai Nights. Look, I did love watching Shanghai Noon. I was thrilled that was the comment that someone suggested
Perfect.
it, because I'm like, that could have been straight out of my brain, honestly. And then the second one, I was happy that your spinny wheel of death happened to select it as well. So bravo, spinny wheel of death.
It's a wheel of adventure, not death. We're not going to be negative about this.
Look, I would like to tell you where we're going next, because I've been sitting on this all week and I'm excited. But unless you have anything further to say about Shanghai Noon, do you want to do some social bumps so that we can actually, get to where we're going?
Absolutely. If you want to know the next movie we're going to watch, you have to sit through this first. So, if you want to consume our content, you can do it in multiple places.
Consume.
First of all, if you want
to consume it.
Num 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 num. You can do it on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple iTunes podcasts, and all those locations you will find us as Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. In any one of those places, please like, comment, subscribe, and follow. We would really love to hear from you, and we'd really love to see you following us along. If you want to follow us on social media, you can do so in two places. On TikTok, we are also Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. We post clips and reels from the show, and you can kind of see what some of our favorite moments of the show are by watching along with us. You can also follow us on Instagram, which is Jim_and_Ben. I post movie posters, clips, thumbnails, all sorts of things on that as well. Again, like, comment, subscribe. Hey, and as this was a user pick, or a listener pick, sorry, if you on our YouTube leave a comment about a movie you would like us to watch, as long as it's appropriate, and I think as adults we can understand what that means, we will add it to the Wheel of Adventure, and it may get picked as one of the movies that we watch. But until that next wheel spin, it's time to hear from Jim about what we'll be watching next week.
All right, I wanted to shake it up, okay? And I am going to give you a choice, because I have decided in my mind that I would be super happy with either of these options, okay?
We haven't done this in a while.
Both of them could be classed as fantasy, okay? So they're both fantasy films. But on the one hand, you have hyper masculine fantasy film, okay? Just a male sensibility, a man's movie all the way through. And on the other side, door number two, you have like a feminist, revisionist fantasy movie. And you, Ben, get to choose. Keep in mind, I would be super happy to watch either of these. But do you want hyper-masculine fantasy movie, or do you want, sort of feminist revisionist fantasy movie? What's it going to be?
Kind of, well, both.
You can't have both.
Well, because I am a man's man, and I'm super comfortable with being a man's man, I'm going to choose the hypermasculine movie.
Okay. Well, you will be pleased to know that we are going to watch Guy Ritchie's King Arthur, Legend of the Sword from 2017. And I am just delighted.
Can I change my pick?
No, you chose it. You chose it, and that's it. We're living with it. So
I want to be a feminist.
You have done this yourself. So King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, you can find it on Prime Video. So watch along, enjoy, or don't, because there's a lot in this movie, and you may or may not enjoy it.
Of all the Guy Ritchie movies you could have picked.
I feel like it's a little bit chaos mode this week, but who doesn't like a little chaos? I'm an agent of chaos sometimes.
Hey, I'm not ending negative on this. It's going to be great, guys. You should watch it too, and join us on our next podcast of Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures.
It is going to be great. Bye.